Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast, coming at you wherever podcasts are found and on YouTube now. So there is a video version of this podcast available, which we are kind of feeling our way through as we go. But I think we're getting in the hang of it, man. I think we're starting to figure it out. Jacob, how you doing?
Oh, doing well. Doing real well. Yeah, it's exciting. I like the video podcast because it gives you a visual perspective of a little bit more of our personalities, especially like, on Scott's episode, the episode we're actually going to be talking about this week on this breakdown episode. Scott's episode was fascinating because there were so many things that going back and forth that we were so interested in.
Yeah.
There was a point where you're like, I'm squirming over here because I want to ask these questions. You just keep taking questions. But I'm like, we got all night, so it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, it's super fun watching the video side of everything and kind of seeing the personalities kind of come alive.
You could see Jacob squirming. You could see it. It was fantastic. So yeah, that was a really good time. And man, like, God, we got a lot to talk about. But we just got back from the Mobile Hunters Expo. What a freaking awesome time that was, getting to meet everybody. I mean, really, dude, it was kind of exhausting, to be honest. Like, there was just so many people there, and we got to talk to a ton of you guys. A ton of listeners came by, and we're definitely very appreciative that all you guys took time out of your day to come say hey to us and talk hunting for a little while. So, dude, I had a lot of good conversations with listeners, man. I don't know about you, but it was like, especially Saturday, I didn't even get to go pee for like 6 hours or something. I mean, dude, it was real.
So it was super exciting. It was super fun. But yeah, there was times I'm like, I gotta go to the bathroom. Someone was talking to me. I'm like, look, if you can walk and talk, just keep talking to me. We're walking to the bathroom. Okay, you can stand next to me next to the urinal and just keep on talking, man. But especially in between the seminars, I was like, we gotta do as much as we can in the little bit of time we have before the next presentation.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, no, it made it super fun. It was fun. Like, we had listeners. I think it was a father and son came down from northern Indiana, drove all the way down there to come hang out, meet Jeremy and Daniel from Do It Yourself Hunter, and others. And that was super exciting. Then we had guys drive all the way up from Florida, South Carolina, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi. I mean, everywhere. We got some guys drove as far as 12 hours to be there. So yeah, it was awesome.
That was pretty crazy. You got your buck scored, your velvet buck. A little surprise there, huh?
Yeah, he's bigger than I thought he was.
Yeah. Hey, I'll tell you what. By the way, I spent a couple hours this morning editing a podcast we did while we were there. So you guys will hear it coming out here pretty soon, but we got 8 different guys from the show who you'll know most of them, and asked them like their best tips. So it's like a 10-minute segment with 8 people, and in that we have a shot of the booth, and you had your velvet buck hanging up. And, dude, he looks good on that freaking shot. Like, when it goes to that wide shot of the whole booth, he is like nothing but main beams, dude. Those main beams go on forever.
Yeah, I never really put a tape to him. I was kind of like, one time I was messing around with it, and I was like, I'm not going to do this. And, come to find out his shortest main beam was 26 and I think 2/8 inches or something like that. Was his shortest. Man. Which is ridiculous.
That's a big old main beam.
Yeah, it's like that is freaking crazy.
They go on for miles, boy.
Yeah, but no, he officially scored. He grossed 137 and 3/8 or something like that. I got a photo of it somewhere on my phone, but yeah, 137 inches. Which again, I didn't think he was that big. I thought it was. I didn't think he was that. I didn't think he was that big, but. Yeah, the main beams did a lot for him. That and also we went back and looked at photos because you're like, dude, that deer shrunk since
100%
since you shot him.
Absolutely, he shrunk.
Which because he is in velvet and it's the real velvet. It's not artificial velvet on him. So they taxidermists, they shoot him with this shot,
formaldehyde, right?
Yeah, some kind of shot, whatever, to help like cure the tissue and everything. And then I think it still goes through like a freeze dried method.
Yeah, hang it upside down and freeze dry it,
something like that. And when you go back and look at photos of him when I shot him, which of course, velvet's a live tissue, you can see how much more fuller it is. Like right now when he's mounted, you can see like all the texture of the antler underneath the velvet. When he wasn't, like when I first shot him, that was not the case. It was just
when he was fresh dead.
Yeah, it was just like smooth velvet. Like you couldn't see any texture because it wasn't shrunk around the antler. And I'm like, dude, I don't know.
Yeah. He's a big deer, man. Yeah. He's a big deer. But yeah, there was a lot about the expo. We're going to be doing something where we kind of cover the expo in full. But if you missed it, shame on you.
Yeah,
Man,
for real.
shame on you. You shouldn't have missed it if you did miss it. It was a freaking awesome show.
Yeah, the best whitetail event of the year for sure for southern hunters specifically.
It kind of ruined all other shows for me. Like we got a couple other shows local to us that we might go to, but like man, that it kind of spoils you because it's a smaller show, but there's not all the stuff there that you're not interested in. And I can honestly, truly say that every single person that I talked to, like every listener that came up and talked to us, whether they're from Alabama or Georgia or South Carolina or Texas, doesn't matter. They were all like just the real deal. You know, they're if you're the kind of person that listens to this podcast and podcasts like this one, you probably talk about deer hunting like in a certain way. Like you're on a certain kind of like wavelength with it, I guess you would say. Everybody there is like on that same wavelength, if that makes sense. And it was just every single person you talk to, you could just have a freaking awesome discussion with them about the kind of stuff that we all enjoy talking about every single week. It's not like, me talking to, the guy at work or whatever who's like kind of a casual deer hunter, which there's nothing wrong with, but it's like you just get to have that in-depth conversation that just like feeds the soul, man. Like it's great to have that camaraderie with people, and everybody I talked to at the show had that. It was fantastic, really.
Yeah, and just surrounded by so many big buck killers in the Southeast.
Oh,
like there was one listener. I want to say his name was Gus. I can't remember, and I'm sure you're listening to this. So I apologize for butchering your name, but I know the guy that was with him his name was Joseph. He goes to Mississippi State University. They came and talked to me after Michael Perry's seminar. And he was showing me some of the deer that he's killed, and some other. I had a couple other guys come up to me and show me some deer they've killed since they started listening to the podcast. And I'm like, "Did y'all submit these for like listener success?" Or like, "No." And I'm like, "Well, send it in, man." Like one of the dudes, he killed in the last 3 years of the podcast, he's killed 6 or 7 bucks, and they were all really, really, really good deer, and they're all from Mississippi, like really good deer.
I talked to. Wait, what was the guy's name?
I can't remember.
I talked to a fella. He's a patron of ours.
Okay.
His name's Richard, and me and him were talking. And another thing too, man. I had a lot of listeners come up to me and be like, "Man, I feel like I know you." And when I started talking to you guys, it was like I knew you too. I mean, we just picked up like we're in that deer camp atmosphere. It was awesome. And I was talking to Richard, and he starts showing me. He's like, "Yeah, I killed this since I started listening. I killed this in Mississippi." And he was showing me all these bucks. I'm like, "You want to come on the podcast?" We got to talking about it. So I actually emailed him today about that. So yeah, we might line something up with him here in the future.
Yeah, that's like the ultimate goal is you go from being a listener to the podcast to a guest of the podcast, which has happened to a couple of the past guests on the podcast. Started as listeners and then ended up becoming guests of the show, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, man. Oh, it's so awesome. But okay, we're gonna cover the expo more in depth on a later show. Yep. But we're gonna talk about Mr. Scott Seals, Scott's episode. This one's been a long time coming because we've had Scott on twice. The first time it was him and Nick Harris. Actually, both times it was him and Nick Harris. The first time we were really like diving deep on their like rut tactics, I guess. And then for the next one, it was the big year ender. So, we're kind of all over the place with that one.
Yeah.
This time we talked to him exclusively about the early season feed tree things, which Scott has told us is kind of his bread and butter. And we've never got into it with him. Mm-hmm. And I was really, really excited to have this conversation because, Scott hunts the same place that I've hunted for a long time. I've never had success early season out there. Scott's had a lot of success early season out there. And so it's just it was a fascinating conversation from that standpoint. But what were your thoughts on the conversation as a whole?
So it all kind of started even before the podcast when I was talking to Scott previously about doing this topic for this episode, talking early season feed tree hunting is, so many of us have always heard, and it's been like beating our heads through outdoor media about you could only hunt evenings early season, specifically on feed trees, but just in general, whether you're hunting a food plot, ag field, like you can only hunt evenings. And I think there's definitely some truth to that, especially if you're in a lot more ag country, where there is a ton of wide open ground, there's a huge destination food source, and for you to get in there in the mornings, unless you can come through the timber and slip in there, you're probably going to bump a lot of deer off those fields. And Scott's been doing this for years now about hunting in the mornings, and he's like, that's absolutely false, at least in our area of the country, in our habitat type. And this kind of goes back to something you're going to hear on a future episode, guys. Not to jump too far ahead, but in a couple weeks you'll hear Jeremy, Aaron, and Jonathan Moreland on a podcast that we did at the Mobile Hunters Expo, and we talked about the idea of relevancy to your area.
Yep.
You know, some strategies and tactics and specific strategies work in very specific areas of the country, and others may not. And then other strategies may work in a wider range of tactics or in regions. And this is something that I think is very specific to the area that Scott's really hunted, but also I think it could translate into other areas as long as you're hunting almost more of a big wood setting, not necessarily an agriculture setting, but where you have a lot more timber than wide open ground, specifically talking ags. So getting into the conversation, I was really interested in getting more of his take on truly how long he's been doing this early season tactic of hunting mornings. And his thought process is, unlike what you and me've done, we've hunted mornings early season, and we're getting in 30, 40 minutes before dark.
Yep.
Setting
Before
up.
daylight.
Oh, yeah, sorry, before daylight. And setting up, and there always seems like there's times when deer start blowing at you, like dadgummit, 30 minutes before daylight.
More times than not.
More times than not, or you hear them walking by, you're like, crap, man. And one thing that was something that he made a huge emphasis on is not going in the dark. Like, you almost like want to hang back and wait until gray light or when it's, pretty good light out before you slip into those spots. And again, he's using, in the area of the country that he's hunting in Alabama, there's a lot of pines, a lot of thick clear cuts, and he's using that as his path of travel to get into these little SMZs where this hardwood timber's at. And that is something we haven't heard before. It was really eye-opening. And to be honest, the more and more we talk to other successful bow hunters about this, especially in other parts of the country, like, that makes perfect sense in that kind of habitat.
Yeah, no, I love it. And it honestly got me thinking, especially today at work, which, by the way, little side note, at the end of the podcast, we're going to be hitting a Q&A. We did a Q&A last week. We got a couple more questions to hit today, but you can go to thesouthernoutdoorsman.com and you can find that listener Q&A form and go fill that out and get your question answered on the show. But that exact subject actually had me all distracted today at work. I was taking a break, and I was like, looking at the map when I was taking my break. And it got me wondering about, on my hunting club, kind of coupling Scott's idea with Richard Manry's idea of doing his little thicket, clear out. He's got his tree in a thicket, and maybe he plants a little food plot. I've already got 2 or 3 spots that I'm kind of interested in thinking about this. But, club's 5 minutes down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Go hop in the truck, eat some breakfast, whatever, kind of take it easy, get over there, slip in, and just hopefully expect to have something come by at like between 8 o'clock in the morning to like, I don't know, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, just whatever like hours I end up hunting. So that I was kind of interested in that aspect of it. And I was also really interested in which actually, before I move on from that, it makes so much sense because you're letting the deer get settled. You're letting them get to where they want to go, because at that 1 hour before daylight time period, if you think about it, that's when those deer are trying to get back to their beds. That's when it's like, God's flipping the lights back on and they're all trying to get back into cover before that happens. And so it's just a perfect recipe for you to actually just like run into deer. And how many times walking in early season before daylight do you run into deer, especially if you're cutting through hardwood bottoms and stuff? And I also like how it relates to, kind of like you said, deer hunting media. A lot of it comes from like the Midwest or just ag-heavy areas where there's a lot of, agricultural fields. That's where people who work in the hunting industry move to because they can shoot big giant bucks there regularly. Mm-hmm. I can see how not hunting in the morning like really plays out there. Like I can see why that's the case. But down here, I've said it a couple times, like over the years, there's always, and I mean like always, a couple of really big deer that get killed early in the season on whatever WMA you hunt, because there's some guy that's walking out there and he's going and sitting on a white oak at, before daylight, and he doesn't know he's not supposed to be hunting mornings, quote unquote. And he's killing a big deer. Meanwhile, a lot of people who maybe consumed a lot of that media and listened to it, they're sitting at home and really they're just kind of burning up hunting time. So I like it from that aspect because I like being a little bit contrary to traditional hunting media, but also it makes a lot of sense because it's region specific. I think it's site specific, and especially with our woods, they're so much thicker. Scott's talking about coming in from the pine thicket. And it's like, well, if you come in from the pine thicket, you're golden because, first of all, they're probably not in there yet by the time you're walking in. And even if they are in there, you can walk within 40 yards of them, and they're not going to know what you are unless they smell you or you make some obvious human sound like your phone rings or you bang metal against something.
Yep.
You know, if you're just walking through busting twigs and stuff, you're another deer for all they know. You know, they're probably going to sit there and listen pretty hard to make sure that's what you are, but they're not going to, you know, turn inside out and run away. So I think that's another key aspect is like you got to come from what the negative terrain would be for that time of day, you know.
What you're talking about, episode 141 with Josh Driver, talking about negative terrain. That's something he talked about a lot, especially early season. But, you know, the other interesting factor about, you know, Scott's success, getting on bachelor groups, you know, killing some really good deer, having opportunities, seeing like, one thing, I don't know if people picked up on this, 2 of the biggest deer he's ever seen, if not the biggest, without the biggest deer he's ever seen, was all early season within the first couple of days of season opening. Which is kind of surprising because most people are like, oh, I'm going to see them during the rut when they're out cruising. That's not the fact, at least with what Scott sees. So it is fascinating that also one thing he brought up was when he first started hunting public land, you know, a lot of this public land, especially in the state of Alabama, a lot of it's been clear cut now maybe a couple times. But there was a point, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of the public land in Alabama wasn't quite yet pines. And I'm sure it was like this in a lot of the Southeast. It hadn't been all completely clear cut over. So he was hunting specifically larger tracts of hardwoods earlier on in his kind of hunting career. And then as they started getting dwindled down, that's the right word, he had to start focusing on these skinny little SMZs. And some of these SMZs, like me and Andrew have been in some of these different spots, they literally only may be 10 yards wide at the widest in some of these SMZs, especially when they get really close to the very point of them when they stop up in the pine thicket. And that's also one of those places that you typically find a lot of buck sign. You'll find rubs right there. You'll find a scrape or two right there typically. And it's easy for a buck to kind of come in and out of that spot to feed. And what he's talking about, and I guess the example of the shoebox, I've never been to the shoebox spot like what Scott talked about, but it's like so tight, like you can't see anything other than like what's right down under your stand and out in front of you just a little bit. And it seems like those are the kind of areas he's having a ton of success. But where I was trying to get at is these large, expansive hardwoods that he used to hunt. Now there's now these small little SMZs that he's focused on, and it went from like him having to walk, you know, thousands of acres in order to find these hot feed trees to now there's only a few spots they could be at in these SMZs. Like you still got to walk a lot, but he's able to spot check all these different SMZs. And like a lot of guys you talk to that hunt feed trees, you know, they always have like a few that come to mind, maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 different trees. They're like, these are almost hot every single year. I can almost guarantee it. But he can always spot check these different locations a lot quicker than if you had to go walk, you know, a 500-acre hardwood block compared to like these skinny little SMZs. So that's an interesting benefit. And he even said is like he almost used the word it's easier now to get on the deer because of how tight it is in these spots and there's less opportunities. But he's like, it's not necessarily easier. It's just maybe like it's you don't have to wander around so much in order to find those locations. It's pretty much you're walking into a spot, and within 50 yards of you, you should find that feature. If it's not there, if it's not hot, you're bouncing to the next one. And I thought that was really interesting.
That's a really good point. It was fun to talk about this for another reason for me, because a lot of people, and we've had listeners write in with this a lot of times, say that the feed tree thing doesn't work in like pine, like hill country, or specifically like pine cutover, like the kind of place that we live. And I've probably even said that too in the past.
I've said it too.
Yeah, like it just doesn't work like it does, like in Jonathan Moreland's case where he's hunting giant, you know, ag river bottoms or whatever. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say I don't know if I've said it doesn't work. I just said I've never had success with it in that kind of area. But continue.
But I like finding Scott because he's a walking contradiction of that. It does work. Like, you just have to burn the boot leather. And when you really think about it, like, think about the place that we all hunt. And think about how many times you've hunted out there in October and how many trucks you normally see.
Yeah.
You know, there are very few people that even bow hunt the place, like, relatively.
I mean, most places in the Southeast are like that, to be 100% honest. Unless it's bow only. If there's a gun season to be had, probably 90% of your pressure is going to come during gun season, or archery season.
Exactly. So not that many people bow hunt it, especially if you compare it to gun hunt numbers. And then also on top of that, how many of those people who are bow hunting it are like going out and doing the whole feed tree thing? You know, like how many of them have the woodsmanship skills to like and the presence of mind or whatever to go out there and do that kind of thing? Like how many of them are looking for a feed tree? So I think that it kind of boils down to a lot of people don't actually like look for that kind of thing, you know? I honestly, in the place that we all hunt, I don't know if I've ever gone out and actually like hardcore scouted for a feed tree. Have you? I don't think I have. Like went out looking for a white oak feed tree.
I have gone in places. Well, looking for them. No, it's more like I wander up on them. Like, okay, cool, got this here. I've hunted some spots that I knew there were oaks there. I'm like, I'm just gonna go in blind and sit and like had some close calls. Mostly never with bucks. It's always with does. Actually, I lie. One time it was with bucks, and we screwed the pooch on that one. Nice 8-point. That's a story I'd have my brother on the podcast for. I'll tell this one real quick. It was feed trees. A bunch of those guys call them different things. Swamp chestnuts, chestnut oak, mountain oak. You know, there's huge acorns. Okay, and there was a spot that had a bunch of them. Not anymore, but used to have a bunch of them. And me and my brother went and hunted it. Very close to where old boy walked in on you. Very close to that spot.
Wait, which old boy?
This past season, the big old boy that his voice didn't match his body.
Oh gosh,
that spot.
Gosh.
So
yeah,
right there used to be a bunch of big chestnut oaks, or you know whatever you want to call them, swamp chestnut oaks right there.
Yeah.
And we went and hunted it early season. It was October, and went in blind. But I had gone in that area like a week previously, and I didn't get to that spot, but to a spot not 50 yards from there, and there was a bunch of those those acorns dropping. We went side up. Long story short, it was a morning hunt. And this was in October, and it was like the 20th or something like that. Season had only been open for like 5 days. And this is like back in college. Well, I'm talking green. We were real green. And I was like, man, I took my bow. He took his bow. I'm like, you're taking your climber. You're going to sit. I'm going to have you sit like 50 yards to my right. I'm going to sit 50 yards to your left in this specific spot. Why? I have no idea. But I was like, if a deer comes through here, we should get a shot opportunity. And getting into that spot, we got set up in the dark at like 6:30 in the morning. Sun came up. And I texted him, like, hey, he was like facing a different direction. I'm like, hey, I hear something directly behind me because I was like facing this little holler. And I hear something directly behind me. I'm like, turn your stand, because we're both in climbers at the time. I'm like, turn your stand around and kind of like watch over it, like, you know, farther to your left. He did. And at like 8:30, I should have brought this up with Scott. I didn't think about this just now. 8:30 in the morning, I hear something, and he texts me, and he's like, I think there's a deer underneath me. And I look over him. He's like 40 yards from me, 45 yards. I look over him, and there's this really nice 8-point, like standing underneath him, feeding around his tree. And he's like looking at me with his bow, and he's looking down. He's looking at me with his bow, and you know, we're pretty high in the climbers. And he's like looking at me, and he starts standing up to get a shot. And I'm like, I think I can maybe shoot him from here, but I was like, I couldn't ever get a good shot angle, and I just wasn't.
Wait, why didn't your brother shoot him?
That's what I'm trying to get to.
Okay.
So it's like directly underneath him. Well, as he like gets his bow up, and I'm watching this all go down, he like gets up and he goes to twist in the stand, and he makes some kind of noise. And this deer looks up at him and is like, I don't like this one bit. And it bounds off like probably 20, 30 yards. And when that happens, he tries to draw his bow, whatever. He can't get his bow drawn back while it's moving. And he stops, and it stops, and he starts like grunting at it or something. And the deer like just kind of looks at him and just kind of walks off down the bottom. Come to find out, we looked across the holler from us, up close to this pine thicket, and there was 3 other bucks over there kind of sparring. And this buck went over there, and they all started like messing around sparring as a bachelor group. And that was like, again, like October 20th on this place. So, you know, it was fairly interesting. But again, I don't know why I didn't think about that when we talked to Scott, but that was one of the spots, you know, we went in blind and didn't know what to expect, and happened to run into a bachelor group in a really nice 8-point. I mean, probably 120-inch 8-point. It was like right underneath, right underneath Christopher. And dude, he wouldn't let me. That's the only time he's ever hunted in the management area. And maybe a couple of times he's gone, but that's the only time he's really ever seen deer. And he's the kind of guy, like a lot of dudes, if he sees bucks like that in a spot, that's the only place he ever wants to go back. Never wants to go to a new spot. It's got to go back to the same spot. So, like, I remember him and my brother Thomas, they'd try to always go back in there. They wouldn't see anything. And but like that, he doesn't want to hunt the management area because he's like, man, you screwed up that opportunity for me last time. If I was sitting where I should have, I would have seen that deer walking in on me. But yeah, that was a fun situation. But that
brutal.
That was a spot where you had thick pines right up against those hardwoods, and it was a real thick edge right there. And that buck was just kind of working in and out of that edge, feeding on oaks, feeding on acorns.
So I want to talk about something that I found pretty interesting that Scott mentioned, and that is he does not rely on trail cameras to monitor his feed trees. He's going strictly off a sign, and he's basing it off his own observations in the field, be it sign or the actual deer that he ends up seeing. And I found that interesting because, like, my instinct with feed trees is like, hey, let's throw some cameras on these bad boys and see what we got coming in. Scott sounded like he didn't like to do that because, one, he's afraid it'll spook the buck. Two, he doesn't want to go in there and check the camera because it sounds like when he finds that tree and it's hot, he's out. He's cutting a trail. He's figuring out his access as he leaves that tree, and he's not coming back until it's time to actually make a move and hunt that tree. So that I don't know. That was another interesting aspect of it for me. Is like going off the sign, and he's like, I'll go hunt it. If the biggest buck I see is a 6-point, then I'll bounce and I'll go to the next one.
Yeah.
And until he finds what he's looking for.
We said some of it's like the adventure aspect. Like number one, like you mentioned, like he's had bad luck with trail cameras where you get one photo of that big buck and he never shows back up again. Like he sees that camera, and a lot of times, like a lot of people think cameras are more stealthy than what they really are, especially for cameras on whether it's video mode or photo mode. The infrared lights on that camera, unless it's like a camera that has like blackout lights where it's supposedly not supposed to glow, like most of other trail cameras, they don't have quote unquote blackout lights on it. If you go sit that sucker up in the dark and you walk by, it glows red. Now I don't know if a deer can see that or not, but it definitely seems like they are somewhat aware to it.
Yeah.
And they see this, whether they can see red or not, because a lot of people say they can't see red, they can't see green. They see this aura of light at eye level with them, and they're like, what is that? And then they bounce like, I'm not going to come back, or I'm not going to come back in front of that camera. I'm going to walk around the tree. Who knows? But it is definitely a very interesting thought that, just him not wanting to use trail cameras, because we've met other guys, and again, a future episode coming out here in about 2 weeks. We talk about trail cameras on feed trees.
Yep.
And it works for some guys and doesn't work for others. So, yeah, I thought that was interesting too. But also it comes down to, if there's sign there, if there's really good buck sign and there's feed sign, it's like, why do you need a camera there? Like, if the sign's there, go hunt it. Maybe it's, maybe there's no mature bucks using it, but you'll find out pretty quickly if you hunt it right.
Yeah. They're smashing the cough drops.
Yeah.
You struggle a little bit after the expo?
Uh-huh.
You pick up a little something over there?
Yeah. Oh, someone gave me a cold. So, I'm trying not to cough on my mic right now.
Yeah.
But anyway, but I thought that was really interesting, like the lack of trail camera use. But to me, it kind of makes more sense because, like, Scott's huge on woodsmanship. Yeah. He's like, you should be able to go in the woods and find the sign you need around those feed trees. If they're dropping, you should be able to see that sign. You should be able to see tracks, should be able to see scrapes, and hopefully be able to see rubs in those areas. And then figure out how you need to hunt it and come back in there.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, and after he described some of the spots that he finds that where he's like, he knows it's hot, I for sure 1,000% found that. I guess it was 2 seasons ago now, and did not go back to it. I didn't go back to it
what was the sign there? Like
all of the above. It was on a, so there's a bluff gap. There's a big cutover that comes down, which you know exactly where that is. I've killed 2 bucks out of this cutover before. This big cutover comes down. There's a small drain, very small, very slight drainage that comes out of that cutover. It doesn't show up on topography maps. And where that drainage comes out, it runs into a larger creek bottom. In that larger creek bottom, there's bluffs on both sides. Very rugged terrain. But where the creek comes out of that cutover, it hits that bluff line, and there's a nice, big, beautiful bluff gap right there. But it's still really, really steep. Like, it just drops right off. And right there on that very, very steep slope where that drop-off was, it was all of that sign. There was rubs there, a lot of whip rubs that were fresh. There was deer scat all over the place. There was obvious feed sign, just tilled up ground. It's like the whole hillside was like bare. It's like you went up there with a rake and like raked off the whole hillside. And some of it was probably turkey scratch, but there was a lot of deer droppings there too. And that's why I've asked a couple people this. People hear this in future episodes about turkey scratch and feed sign, because if you have a lot of turkeys in your area, those turkeys are probably feeding under those same feed trees. Jonathan, being from Arkansas, didn't.
He's like that doesn't make sense to me. He's like I want the coordinates of where that's at if he's got that many turkeys.
Yeah,
there.
For real. I forgot asking Jonathan. I'm like, well, that was in Arkansas. But anyways, I found all that stuff, and I couldn't get back to it for like 9 or 10 days, and I wasn't gonna take a vacation day to hunt it, and so I let it go. and I didn't return to it after 10 days because, you know, I mean, when you have limited time, I'm like, well, that feed tree's probably dead. Like, it's probably past its prime now. And after talking to Scott and a couple other people, like, it could have still been hot. You know, they can be hot for 20 days at a time.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, I didn't go look at it, and I regret it. I regret it now, big time. But I can see how that early season time frame,
was that a white oak down there? Do you remember what it was?
Oh, I don't know.
You know,
It was either a white oak or like a northern red oak. There's a lot of northern red oaks in there. I did find a white oak for what was for sure a white oak further down the ridge that had similar feed sign on it, though not as heavy. So there was two different trees, and that's also what kind of got me started on the steep slope thing. Wonder about steep slopes because I like people might notice. Like I asked that to a lot of these feed tree guys if they hunt in hill country, if they find that bucks prefer feeding on those really steep slopes because that's really the only place I found it on this particular management area is on those really steep slopes. I haven't found it. There'll be some pretty wide, big hardwood bottoms every once in a while, and I just never seem to find a feed tree in that. The only time I ever find them is on those very steep slopes. So I don't know if the steepness has anything to do with it, but I could see why it would. You know, nobody's walking into those really steep slopes. Nobody's hunting them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. There's a lot of food for thought there for sure. Go down a rabbit hole with that.
Yeah, just the trail camera application I think is just interesting. I mean, I think because y'all are going to hear this on a future episode, I think if you're in an area with a lot more, I'm going to call it target-rich environment for feed trees, where you have huge expanses of hardwoods, I think you get away with the trail camera aspect because, like, you may find a hot tree now, and in 2 weeks there might be a tree 50 yards from there that's real hot.
Yeah.
Versus where Scott's at, there might be one or two hot feed trees in this one SMZ, and when those burn out, there's not another one in that whole SMZ. So those deer are going to completely relocate much further away than in a huge expanse of hardwoods, where you may have another good feed tree, and it starts dropping literally like a week or two later.
Yeah.
Very close to it.
Yep.
So, and I feel like in that kind of environment where you have a lot more hardwoods, I feel like you could probably use the trail cameras a little bit more because there's more options for those deer to go to.
Yep.
And you can kind of pattern, where they're coming from, like what kind of bedding area they're coming from, but also how they're using that feed tree, and then start finding other trees close to it that if that one starts dropping, you can get a pattern to go hunt it, go move to another tree fairly close by.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's interesting. And then also, one thing that he said that I thought was super interesting is how nonchalant the bucks are that time of the season. How it's like, dude, they come in there, they're like loud and just like rowdy, like even like the real big
raising
bucks.
cane.
He's like, they're not trying to be stealthy, they're not trying to do anything like that. They're coming in there like some boys having a good old time.
Yeah.
And they don't ever, they're not weary because they haven't been busted, haven't had a lot of, haven't had really any hunting pressure. And he's like, you only get it like that for a couple weeks before enough people get out there and start bumping deer that, that totally shuts down. But I thought that was pretty interesting. He's like, oh yeah, you hear them coming. He's like, they don't just slip into a spot, especially if it's a bachelor group. I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool. Because again, I would have never thought about it. I thought they just kind of, slip in, slip out. But kind of comes back to like terrain that we're talking about in the habitat. It's so thick. Deer could definitely be quiet moving through it, but it's like, if those bucks are just like having a good old time, getting ready to go to the feed tree, and they're kind of maybe, fighting over who gets the tree first.
Yeah.
You hear them coming, like, okay, cool. I know there's, some deer about to, hike down in here, and now I just got to get shot opportunity. What was your thoughts on him taking the wind into consideration? Because that was one of the biggest things I was thinking about, was like swirling wind in those steep bottoms. And he's like, pretty much, he's like, when he like cuts a trail there, he's not taking wind into consideration. He's just cutting a trail out, trimming a trail out that he'll figure out what wind can he use in order to get back in there. But he's not taking that into consideration when he cuts out. He's trying to get the closest way. What's the shortest route for him from going to that tree to an access spot that he can drop down into it?
Yeah. No, that was interesting. It kind of makes me feel like I overthink the wind sometimes. I mean, obviously you have to pay attention to it and make sure that your wind is good, but at the same time, I think I overanalyze it and overplan for stuff because at the end of the day, in a place especially like where we hunt in this hill country, the wind is so unpredictable that like I feel like you can kind of waste a lot of time trying to like really exactly predict what the wind is going to do, especially for something like an access route where it's dynamic and you go up this hill and it's doing one thing and then you get down on this bottom and the trees are a little bit taller so it does this off of that. I mean I don't know. It sounds like Scott has more brain space for think about how to actually kill the deer because he's just like let's figure out the best way where I can get in and out quietly and quickly, and then I'll figure out the wind afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
He's talking about he's like it's a briar thicket, man. Like I'm just trying to go where there's less briars, and that's where I'm gonna make my trail. So no, I found that pretty interesting. Early season also, a lot of times we don't get just like a ton of wind. It's not like high winds here in Alabama.
It's kind of stagnant.
Yeah, it's pretty stagnant a lot of times. So I think a lot of times your wind is just kind of like not really doing much. It's just kind of hanging out
Mm-hmm.
in early season, which I think you could use to your advantage.
Yep.
And maybe Scott's using that to his advantage. But I don't know. What were your thoughts on
No,
it?
I mean, I just think it's interesting. Like, he's not really worried about what when he needs to hunt it, as in like how he's cutting the trail. He's like, I'm just gonna get a trail put in there, and then once I figure out how the trail comes in, I look at a map and just like, okay, what when do I need in order to get into that staying clean? That's it.
Yep.
So not a lot of consideration, which I mean I kind of like. I'm like, okay, you're simplifying everything, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But real quick, we got a couple minutes before we got to hop on another podcast. So let's get to some Q&As real quick.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to bring up real quick is another thing that we mentioned that was kind of interesting is we're hunting Georgia this year, and we know we want to hunt like a big wood setting. At the Mobile Hunters Expo, we ended up talking to a whole bunch of Georgia folks. There's a lot of Georgia people that drove up to that, and probably most people I talked to who were listeners were from Georgia. And I got a ton of advice on different places to go hunt. Oh, yeah.
All the Arkansas people talked to me.
Oh, yeah.
I was surprised about the amount of people that came from Arkansas.
Oh, yeah. I talked to a lot of Arkansas folks, too. But I got a lot of advice from all these different people, and I was mainly asking them, I'm like, hey, does this place have a high deer density? Does this place have a low deer density? Like, trying to learn. And one thing I brought up to you, which this is just food for thought, but I think that we're on the same page that when it comes to Georgia this September, we want to target feed trees. Like we want to target early food sources and catch like a summer pattern type deal. But in places where there's probably higher buck quality, it's probably lower deer density. So is the deer density high enough to like create those like obvious feed trees like what these folks are talking about, like guys like Scott are talking about, where it's obvious, tilled up ground, deer droppings everywhere, or are there just not that many deer? And so there's not going to be like 10 different deer eating under this tree over the course of 3 or 4 days, generating all that sign. There's going to be like 2 deer that are eating on this tree and maybe like 4 or 5 others. So the sign just won't be as intense. Does that make sense? Do you think that could be a thing?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm just going to take in consideration, are we finding buck sign there or not? Because if we're not finding buck sign, I'm not going to hunt it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just like Scott says, so if there's no buck sign there, I mean, if there is a buck using it, he's clearly not laying any sign like he should be at that time of the year.
Be a good place to go find you a freezer queen.
Yeah, for sure. Or, I don't know, finding a black bear too.
Yeah, or
but you'll find some bear scat. But getting to the Q&As, again, guys, we're trying every week, if we get new Q&As or new questions getting submitted on the website, against southernoutdoorsman.com, there's a Q&A form you can fill out. We're going to read some of those off on each breakdown episode as long as we get them in. So we had a couple more come in. So again, like Andrew said earlier, if you're interested in submitting one, all you got to do is go to the website and then submit your Q&A form, and then we'll work it out on a future episode.
All right. This one is from Kelby. Is Jacob still using the silent approach steps? I'm looking at using those plus a ring of steps this year versus a climber so I can carry my Kafaru pack and skip a trip back to the truck for the pack out. If so, how does he like them? And just in case anybody's unfamiliar, like a ring of steps, he's talking about saddle hunting here. So having a ring of steps as your platform where you just have steps that go basically around the trunk of the tree, so you can walk around the trunk of the tree basically. And then the silent approach steps are it's just a little 90-degree angle step, and you carry like 14 of them or whatever, and you put them up. So that's for you exclusive. I haven't used those in quite a while.
So I still have the silent approach steps. I still like them. I'll carry them at certain times of the year if I don't want to deal with carrying sticks. I can carry 12 of them, and it'll weigh about as much as 2 normal climbing sticks you'd get. Not like some of the ultralight sticks, but I think 12 of them weigh like 2.5 pounds or something like that. You have to practice with them. I actually talked to somebody at the expo who I could tell 100% he didn't use them correctly because he was talking about them flipping over on you. You have to use very specific pressure. There's good YouTube videos on how to use them. They're good in a lot of areas. I just don't like using them on leaning trees. Leaning trees are really tricky, especially if it's a very slightly leaning tree. If it has just a slight lean that you can't tell when you're standing up against the tree which way it's leaning, but once you get up 8-10 feet, you definitely know you're on the bottom side of the trunk. It sucks to kind of get on the top side of the tree in order to keep climbing.
Yeah.
I know, but again, I know some guys that love them. I know some guys that hate them. I don't mind them. There's just certain times I'll use them, and other times I might carry climbing sticks. They're a lot quieter than climbing sticks, unless you use stealth strip to wrap your stick so it doesn't have any metal metallic noise. But they're pretty simple to use. I do not like ring of steps. I've used ring of steps in the past. I don't like them. It's not very comfortable for me on my feet. Plus, I like to be able to actually stand up if I'm saddle hunting. So that's why I like using a larger saddle platform. A lot of guys are like, I want to carry the least amount of weight possible when I go in the woods. I'm like, okay, you do that. It takes a lot more practice, and this is from personal opinion, a lot more practice to shoot your weak side. So if you're a right-handed shooter, be the right-hand side of the tree when you're facing the tree. It takes a lot more practice to do it in a ring of steps than it does with a climbing, or what that does with a regular saddle platform. So I like using a larger saddle platform, like the one I've been using the last couple of years is a tethered Predator XL. I've used Out and Limb, Ridge Runner. I've got a what do you think? Trophy Line Mission platform. I like bigger platforms just because. Yeah, it might be an extra pound or two that I'm carrying in the woods, but if I want to, I can actually freestand on like a little lock on, and I can turn 360 degrees around. And I can freestand when I shoot deer, and I've shot a couple of deer like that, freestanding on my platform, especially if they get directly behind me. It works out really, really good. So I wouldn't just use a ring of steps just because you want to go the most minimalist route, because I promise you, very few guys that I know use them actually like them. Most guys use them for a couple of weeks, and then like, forget that, I'm getting a normal size platform.
Yep. Cool. All right. Let's see. This is a longer one. This is from Joshua Rogers. Hey guys, North Louisiana guy here. Last year I hunted only public land rifle and primitive seasons. I harvested a small buck and a hog. The hog was 5 steps with the most shot between her eyes with a 35 wheeling, so no search needed. Nice. This coming season I joined a club mostly for my wife, and I have an 8-year-old daughter that's very interested in hunting. Also, this season will be my very first season bow hunting. I'm 34 and I've always rifle hunted, and as I'm sure you know, Louisiana is very lenient with their rifle season. Anyways, I love hunting public land and love e-scouting to trying to pick funnels and pinch points. I was thinking about taking the opportunity with a bow on public land since it opens October 1st. There will be no pressure on WMAs and might be my best opportunity to get my first bow kill. Can you help me out and somehow tell me strategies for early season hunting? I hunt some places that I can't say. You hunt some good places, man. I know about these places. You know about those places.
Okay, keep going.
Any help at all would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much in advance. I'll tell you what, we got an episode coming out in about 2 weeks that is going to be right up your alley. It is going to be perfect for those places that you hunt. But basically what he's asking about is his first year bow hunting, opens October 1st, and he's wanting to go to some local WMAs for early season hunting. I would say that, I mean, this past feed tree episode is going to be pretty relevant to you. Even though we're talking about hill country, I think it still holds true for the places that you're talking about. The same principles will apply as far as buck sign goes. I would also suggest listening to episode 141 with Josh Driver, which we mentioned earlier, which has to do with finding a buck's core area. There's a lot of sign reading stuff in there. What's some other episodes?
I don't know. We'll have to think about. I mean, the first Jonathan Moreland episode we had him on, I think it's 178 or 179. I think it's the first time we had him on. We talked quite a bit about feed trees.
Yeah.
We got another one coming out with him next week or 2 weeks from now. But definitely, I mean, feed trees by far is going to be one of your best bets early season. It's just trying to figure out like what species grows down there, what's the preferred species when your season opens. Because if you have a lot of soft mass, like your fruit trees, like your persimmons, really probably not going to hunt pawpaws, but persimmons specifically in the southeast. If your season doesn't open super early, you might not have persimmons still on the trees or even falling. They might have already dropped by the time season comes in. So, to learn what species you have down there that the deer are going to feed on and when they typically drop. And a lot of times you can call your local regional biologist who oversees those public lands and ask them, be like, hey, I want to hunt here early bow season. What is, the species of trees I should focus on for mass trees that these deer are going to focus on, and also if he has the general idea of timing of when they typically drop in that area, and then start scouting around looking for those trees and try to find the feed sign like we just covered in this past week's episode with Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good advice. Also, I don't know the episode numbers off the top of my head, but if you go to your listening platform and whether it be Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and you search these names, you should get the podcast, and I would listen to them. I would search Richard Fott. We interviewed him several times. Robert Carter, he's a Georgia guy. We talked about feed trees with him. He's a traditional bow hunter. I'd listen to whatever episodes we've done with him. And then also we did one that I actually processed to post it, a listener success story today from a guy who had success in early season using Jeff Homan's tactics, which is episode 122, backtracking bucks with Jeff Homan. He was going over his strategy of basically finding a buck on camera and then backtracking it to wherever it's bedding. So those episodes would all be really, really good for you. But man, it really comes down to the sign. Like you just gotta get out there, pay attention to the sign that you're seeing, learn how to read the sign, and just trial and error.
Yep,
so,
absolutely.
It's a great time to get on some deer, man. Great time. You should be taking advantage of that bow season,
especially if you're just trying to kill a deer with the bow.
Oh,
not even just a buck. Like does. Like, killing does on feed trees early season is so fun. Like, I killed one in Tennessee, I guess it was not last season, 2 seasons ago, opening day out there. Went to a spot blind, found a spot that there was some water oaks dropping on the backside of an ag field. And it had a group of does come through, an hour and a half before daylight, got one killed. It's so fun to hunt just deer in general early season. To me, it's another step above to try to kill like a good buck or mature buck early season. But just killing deer, killing does, is so fun early season, and they leave a ton of sign. You definitely, you will know when you find the feature. You're gonna find droppings. You're gonna find tore up ground in general, and if you find bucks on there, you find rubs and scrapes, and bucks are using it. But if you just find tore up deer sign or tore up ground and droppings everywhere, and also cracked, you'll find cracked
like the holes.
Acorns, yeah, where they like chewed them. Some of them fall in their mouth, and they're like half chewed acorns. And you're like, okay, cool. Like deer are definitely feeding in there pretty hot. That's how you can definitely tell whether it's a hot tree or not. If you find that, you will have success if you set it correctly and get down one of that tree.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. All right, last segment of the show. We got some reviews. I don't think we've read this one yet, have we?
No, want me to read it?
Yeah, you get that one. I'll get the other one.
All right, so now we're going to read off some reviews. This is from on Apple Podcasts. Guys, if you enjoy the show, y'all just helped us get over to 1,000 reviews on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Super thankful for that. So we try to read off the new reviews as they come in every single week. So this is a 5-star review. No other hunting podcast even comes close. And this is from Rack Addict 69. Been a listener for 3 years now and have listened to every episode available. Several of them 3 to 4 times. Since I changed career paths, allowing me more time in the woods during the fall and winter, coupled with the tactics from this podcast, my success rate has drastically increased. This podcast has no doubt been a huge contribution to my recent year's success. The guest tips have helped me harvest 6 bucks in the last 3 seasons, putting me in the position of several encounters with other mature deer. If you call yourself an avid hunter but are not listening to this podcast, you better hope that others in your same club or lease or others hunting the same public ground as you aren't either. Jacob and Andrew are able to find some of the best and often overlooked guests out there in their respective areas of the country. And if you listen closely, there will always be a tactic to add to your arsenal. I'm looking forward to the content as we creep close to this season here in Alabama. Keep up the amazing work.
Nice. Thank you for that review. That was an awesome review, man. Love hearing stuff like that. All right. This one is Fired Up to Get in the Woods, 5 stars from Ray de Dorado. Y'all get your listeners fired up to get in the woods. I've spent every 2.5-hour drive to and from our hunting camp in Alabama listening to the Southern Outdoorsman podcast. And I know I'm not the only one to fall asleep in bed listening to it at night either. The last thing you hear before you go to sleep is Jacob. I picked up a bow and started hunting almost 3 years ago, so I'm pretty green in most people's book, but I can't begin to tell you how many little things I've learned listening to your podcast. Always entertaining and very informative. My first 2 seasons were jam-packed with a crazy learning curve, a couple of harvested deer. That was overwhelmingly satisfying. And a few heartbreak opportunities on some beautiful big bucks. This past season, I was fortunate to get my first rack buck the last week of season. It's a moment I'll never forget, and I can't wait to apply what I've learned from personal experience in y'all's podcast this season. Keep up the awesome work, Jeff. Well, congrats, man, on your bucks. That's awesome to hear, and it sounds like you're doing it right, man. At the end of every season, I always like to tell, especially newer hunters, this. At the end of every season, you should look back on that season and be like, man, if I had just done this or that, or now I know how to do this. You know, that tells you that you're looking back at the year and analyzing things, and you kind of, thinking critically about what went down and asking why. And that's going to be the thing that helps you learn faster than anything. Like you couple that with the like free advice that you're getting from the guests that we have on the podcast, and I mean you can really learn and get good really, really fast, really fast. So anyways, congrats, man.
Yeah,
I love it.
Awesome, Jeff.
Love it.
So if you guys got an interesting review, go leave us a review on Apple Apple Podcasts. And if you do that, again, hopefully we'll be able to read out your review on a future Friday or Thursday breakdown, whatever this is now. Maybe it was a breakdown episode, because I love to get the reviews. I love to see what's working for some guys and what like tactics or guests are really like super like really hit home for you or hit real close for you, especially in different areas of the country. Because it's always interesting when you hear, someone write in that lives in a completely different area of the Southeast, or even in the country, like some guys in the upper Midwest that write in saying that one of their guys that they listen to from down in Georgia or Alabama or Tennessee or wherever said something that hit home for them that they're able to use in their own state, their own piece of ground, and have tremendous success with it. So it's awesome to get those reviews, and also get the listener success stories coming in. That gets us extremely excited. Like when we were at the Mobile Hunter Expo, had a lot of guys come by, like I had mentioned earlier, that have had really good success killing good deer since listening to the podcast and taking advice from different guests and really applying them and having success because of that. And those have been awesome coming in. So like again, Andrew's posting pretty much at least one a week.
Yeah.
And you can
I got 2 a week for the next month, and I've still got like 25 I haven't even touched yet.
That's crazy.
So y'all keep writing them in, man. It's awesome.
And where do they write them in at?
You can go to the website. There's actually a submission form on our website where you can go and fill out a form. You tell us about the hunt, tell us your name, state, drop a picture in there, and we'll get to it. I'd love to be able to do like 5 a week. We could do 5 a week. I mean, I have enough for that right now, so maybe we'll start doing that. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But yeah, right now we're doing 2 a week on Facebook and Instagram. So y'all be going and looking out for those. And if you've got one, which a lot of the ones we're going through right now are from like December. So just an FYI, if you wrote in with one in December, we're getting through them,
or
slowly
January.
but surely. Yeah, or January or whatever. So right now I'm like somewhere in like late December with the story. So if you got submitted after that, we're getting there.
Yeah, I had a couple guys at the expo like, yeah, I submitted a listener success story. I haven't seen the article written yet, and I'm like, Andrew's working on it. There's a bunch sitting there.
There's a bunch of them.
So anyway, but no, appreciate y'all listening and also watching this on YouTube. And other than that, make sure you do not miss this coming Monday's episode. I promise you, it's a good one. It's a new format we have never done before, and I think you guys will really, really, really enjoy it. So, thank y'all for listening. Thank y'all for watching, and we'll catch y'all back here on the next week's episode from the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast.